phone rang at 7:04 a.m. on July 20th, 1973, pulling Robert Chan from a dream he could no longer remember. He picked up on the second ring, already knowing who it would be. Bruce only called this early when he wanted to train before the Hong Kong heat became unbearable. "You awake?" Bruce's voice came through clear, energetic, the voice of someone who'd already been up for an hour. "I'm awake now," Robert replied, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Good. Come over at 8:30. I want to work on something." That something would be the last 47 minutes Bruce Lee ever spent in combat movement, and Robert Chan would spend the next 50 years trying to understand why he was chosen to be there, what Bruce knew or didn't know, and whether the secret Bruce shared that morning died with him or was meant to survive. Robert Chan was not famous. He wasn't in Bruce's films, didn't appear in documentaries, wasn't part of the inner circle that history remembers, the Dan Inosantos and Ted Wongs and Taiki Kimura of the world. He was what Bruce called a private student, someone who trained one-on-one with Bruce away from the public schools and formal classes. Their relationship had begun 2 years earlier when Robert, then a 26-year-old Wing Chun practitioner studying under one of IP Man's other students in Hong Kong, had written Bruce a letter, not asking for training. He knew Bruce didn't take students casually, but asking a single question: how do you train your mind to move faster than your body? Bruce had responded, surprisingly, with a phone call. "Your question is backwards," he'd said without introduction. "The body doesn't move slower than the mind. The mind just gets in the way. Come to my house tomorrow at 6 a.m. and I'll show you." That first session had been brutal. 2 hours of Bruce systematically dismantling every assumption Robert held about martial arts, not through lecture but through direct experience. By the end, Robert was exhausted, humbled, and fundamentally changed. Bruce had offered to continue training him privately with one condition: "What we do here stays here. No talking to press, no demonstrations, no using my name to promote yourself. This is just two martial artists working. Can you accept that?" Robert had accepted, and for 2 years they'd met 2 or 3 times a week, always early morning, always at Bruce's home gym. The training was unlike anything Robert had experienced. Not a formal curriculum but an ongoing experiment where Bruce would test theories, try new combinations, push his understanding of body mechanics to extremes. Robert wasn't there to learn a system. He was there to be Bruce's laboratory, a skilled opponent who could provide genuine resistance while Bruce explored the boundaries of what was possible. On that July morning, Robert arrived at Bruce's Cumberland Roadhouse at exactly 8:30 a.m. Linda answered the door, gave him a tired smile. She was used to these early sessions by now and pointed upstairs. "He's in the gym, already warming up." Robert climbed the stairs and found Bruce in the converted room that served as his personal training space, moving through a slow-motion sequence that looked like Tai Chi but wasn't, something Bruce had developed that blended Wing Chun's centerline theory with Western boxing footwork and his own innovations. "You look tired," Robert observed. Bruce smiled slightly, not stopping his movement. "Didn't sleep well. Dreams again." He didn't elaborate, and Robert didn't ask. Bruce occasionally mentioned having intense dreams, but he treated them as personal rather than shareable. "Well, I'm here to wake you up," Robert said, beginning his own warm-up. Bruce laughed. "Good. I need to feel alive this morning. Let's make it real." Real in their private sessions meant sparring without predetermined choreography or pulled techniques, though always with control. Neither wanted to actually injure the other, but the threat of injury had to be present or the training became theoretical rather than practical. They started slowly, trading light contact strikes, feeling out rhythm and distance. Robert noticed immediately that something was different. Bruce's timing was slightly off, his reactions fractionally slower than usual. Not dramatically. Someone without hundreds of hours training with Bruce wouldn't have noticed, but enough that Robert felt it. "You okay?" Robert asked during a brief pause. Bruce nodded, rolling his shoulders. "Yeah, I don't know. Feel a little disconnected, like I'm watching myself from outside." It was an odd thing to say, and Robert filed it away as he might file away any other unusual comment. They resumed sparring, gradually increasing intensity. Bruce landed a beautiful counterpunch off Robert's lead jab, the kind of precise interception that was his signature. "There it is," Bruce said, more to himself than to Robert. Still works. 20 minutes into the session, Bruce suddenly stopped mid-exchange and sat down on the mat, breathing harder than the intensity warranted. Robert immediately went to his side. "Bruce? What's wrong?" Bruce waved him off. "I'm fine. Just got dizzy for a second. Give me a minute." He sat there for maybe 90 seconds, eyes closed, regulating his breathing with visible effort. When he opened his eyes, he looked at Robert with an expression that was difficult to read. Not fear exactly, but something adjacent to it. Uncertainty, maybe vulnerability. "Can I tell you something?" Bruce asked quietly. "And can you promise not to repeat it? Not to Linda, not to anyone, until it doesn't matter anymore." The phrasing was strange, but Robert nodded. "Of course." Bruce took a breath. "I've been having these episodes, couple times a week for the past few months. Dizziness, headaches, moments where I feel like I'm fading. I went to doctors. They can't find anything. Blood works normal, heart's fine, brain scans show nothing. But I know something's wrong. I can feel it." Robert felt a chill despite the morning heat. "Then why are you training this hard? If something's wrong, shouldn't you be resting?" Bruce smiled, but it was sad, resigned. "Because this is what I am. If I stop training, if I start being afraid of my own body, then whatever's happening has already won. I'd rather die doing this than live in fear of doing it." The words hung between them, and Robert wanted to argue, to insist Bruce take the medical concerns more seriously, but something in Bruce's face stopped him. This wasn't a plea for advice. It was a statement of terms he'd already accepted. They resumed training, but the mood had shifted. Bruce pushed harder now, as if trying to prove something to himself, landing combinations with the old precision and power. Robert matched the intensity, understanding instinctively that what Bruce needed wasn't gentleness but genuine engagement, the confirmation that he was still capable, still vital. For the next 20 minutes they went hard, not trying to hurt each other but not holding back either, the kind of sparring that requires complete trust. During a break for water, Bruce said something that Robert has turned over in his mind 10,000 times in the 50 years since. "You know what the real secret is? The thing that all the techniques and philosophy are pointing toward." Robert waited. Bruce continued. "It's not about being the fastest or the strongest or the most skilled. It's about being completely present in the moment, so present that there's no separation between thought and action. When you achieve that, you're not fighting anymore. You're just existing correctly. And in that state, winning and losing don't matter because you're already where you need to be." Robert nodded, thinking it was vintage Bruce philosophy, profound but abstract. Only later would he understand it differently, as a man describing a state he was approaching, a letting go disguised as a teaching point. "That's what I'm trying to do now," Bruce added. "Train to be present, even when my body's telling me something's wrong. Especially then. Because if I can stay present while falling apart, then maybe I've actually learned something." The session ended around 9:15 a.m. They'd gone 47 minutes, longer than planned given Bruce's earlier dizzy spell. Both were sweating heavily, breathing hard, satisfied with the work. Bruce walked Robert to the door, and they stood there for a moment in a silence that felt weighted with something neither could articulate. Finally, Bruce extended his hand. They shook, and Bruce held the grip for a moment longer than usual. "Thanks for being here," he said simply. "For all of it. You've helped me more than you know." Robert laughed, trying to lighten the moment. "You're talking like you're going somewhere. I'll see you next week, right?" Bruce smiled but didn't quite answer the question. "Yeah, next week." But his eyes said something else, something Robert only recognized in retrospect. "Goodbye. Not see you later, but goodbye." Robert left at 9:20 a.m. Bruce Lee would be dead by 2 p.m. that afternoon. The sequence of events is well documented. Bruce went to Raymond Chow's house around 1 p.m. to discuss Game of Death. They went together to Betty Tingpei's apartment around 2 p.m. to convince her to appear in the film. Bruce complained of a headache. Betty offered an Equagesic tablet, a prescription painkiller. Bruce took it and lay down to rest. When they couldn't wake him at 7:30 p.m., an ambulance was called. He was pronounced dead at Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Robert learned about it from a phone call at 10 p.m. A mutual friend, voice shaking. "Bruce is gone. He died this afternoon." Robert's first thought wasn't grief or shock. It was disbelief so profound it felt like reality had malfunctioned. He'd seen Bruce that morning. They'd trained together. Bruce had been alive, vital, powerful. How could someone that present, that embodied, simply stop existing hours later? The second thought, arriving close behind the first. The conversation. The dizzy spell. The talk about feeling disconnected, about something being wrong. Bruce had known. Maybe not consciously, maybe not specifically, but at some level he'd known that morning might be significant, that their sparring might be the last. And he'd chosen to spend it training, doing what he loved with someone he trusted, rather than in a hospital or wrapped in fear. The funeral was a nightmare of crowds, press, speculation, conspiracy theories. Robert attended but stayed in the back, anonymous in the sea of mourners. He spoke to no one, made no statements, and when reporters began hunting down everyone who'd had contact with Bruce in his final days, Robert simply disappeared. He moved back to his parents' village outside Hong Kong, took a job teaching at a local school, and constructed a life that had no connection to martial arts or Bruce Lee or the terrible weight of being the last sparring partner. For 50 years, he maintained that separation. When documentaries were made, he declined participation. When books were written, he refused interviews. When the internet made him theoretically findable, he stayed hidden, using a different name professionally, avoiding any context where his connection to Bruce might surface. It wasn't that he was hiding from responsibility or guilt. He'd done nothing wrong, had no information that would change the official narrative. He was hiding from the unbearable intimacy of those final 47 minutes, from the knowledge of what Bruce's final words had actually meant, from the role of witness he'd never asked for. People want closure, Robert says now, speaking publicly for the first time at age 78 from his modest apartment in Kowloon. They want to know that Bruce's death meant something, that there were signs everyone missed, that if we just paid more attention he could have been saved. But the truth is simpler and harder. Bruce knew his body was failing. He'd done everything he could. Seen doctors, modified his training, tried to understand what was happening. And when no answers came, he chose to keep living as himself rather than as a patient, as a martial artist rather than as someone waiting for medical permission to exist. The 50-year silence, Robert explains, wasn't about protecting a secret. It was about protecting the privacy of a moment that felt sacred. Those 47 minutes weren't about his death. They were about his life, about who he was when nobody was watching except someone he trusted. And making that public, turning it into content for documentaries or conspiracy theories, felt like a violation. Like I'd be betraying the confidence of a friend just because that friend became famous. But time changes calculations. Linda Lee Cadwell is in her late 70s now. Shannon Lee is in her 50s, carrying forward her father's legacy with careful stewardship. Most of Bruce's original students have passed away or are themselves elderly. And Robert, facing his own mortality, began to reconsider what he owed to history versus what he owed to privacy. "I'm not going to live forever," he says plainly. "And when I'm gone, that training session disappears completely. So maybe it's time to put it on record, not for sensation but for accuracy. This is what happened. This is what he said. This is who he was that morning." What Robert wants most to clarify is that Bruce wasn't defeated that morning, wasn't diminished or failing in any visible way. The dizzy spell lasted maybe 90 seconds. The rest of the session, he was Bruce Lee, fast, precise, powerful, completely present. Whatever was happening inside his body, it wasn't visible in his technique. That's what makes his death so shocking. There was no gradual decline, no obvious warning that this was the end. He trained like he always trained. Then hours later he was gone. The other thing Robert emphasizes is Bruce's state of mind, calm, accepting, philosophical but not morbid. He wasn't being dramatic or fatalistic. He was being honest. He felt something wrong. Doctors couldn't explain it. So he chose to keep training despite uncertainty. That's not recklessness. That's courage. That's living according to your principles even when your body is sending alarm signals you can't decode. As for the secret Bruce shared, the teaching about being present, about training to exist correctly even while falling apart, Robert sees it now as Bruce's final lesson, delivered not to a classroom but to one person in a private moment. He was telling me how to live when you know something's wrong but you don't know what or when or how bad. You don't freeze. You don't stop being yourself. You train harder to stay present, to not let fear or uncertainty control you. That's what he was doing that morning, and that's what he'd want people to understand about how he lived all the way to the end. Robert has no interest in conspiracy theories, no patience for speculation about foul play or curses or cover-ups. He took a painkiller he'd taken before without problem. This time, his body reacted badly. Cerebral edema, brain swelling. It's rare, but it happens. Sometimes there's no deeper explanation than tragic bad luck. What haunts Robert isn't the cause of death but the timing. That Bruce had been talking about feeling disconnected, about episodes of dizziness, and that nobody, including Bruce himself, had understood these were neurological warnings of a vulnerability that an analgesic tablet would fatally trigger. Could he have been saved if we'd known? Maybe. If the headache that afternoon had been treated differently, if he'd gone to a hospital instead of lying down, if the swelling had been caught early enough. But you can't live your life in what-ifs. Bruce didn't. He lived in what is. And what was, that morning, was a training session between two martial artists who respected each other. That's what I want people to remember. Not that I was there when he died, I wasn't. But that I was there when he lived, fully doing exactly what he loved. In the 50 years since, Robert never trained seriously again. How could I? He asks simply. Every time I'd try, I'd remember that session, and it felt wrong. Like I was supposed to preserve that as the last thing, not dilute it with decades more training that wouldn't mean as much. Instead, he taught school children, lived quietly, raised a family who knew nothing about his connection to Bruce Lee until his children were adults. Now, having finally spoken, Robert says he feels lighter but also more vulnerable. I've carried this alone for 50 years. Now it's out there and I can't control what people do with it. Some will say I should have spoken sooner. Some will say I shouldn't speak at all. But I'm 78 years old, and if I don't tell this story accurately, someone else will tell it inaccurately after I'm gone. So here it is. Bruce Lee's last training session was 47 minutes on July 20th, 1973. He was fast, he was powerful, he was present. He knew something was wrong but chose to train anyway because that's who he was. And the last thing he wanted me to understand was that being present matters more than being perfect. That staying in the moment even while everything's uncertain is the only real victory. So here's the question that echoes from that July morning. When your body is sending signals you can't interpret, when doctors have no answers, when you feel something ending but don't know how or when, do you stop living as yourself and become a patient waiting for diagnosis? Or do you keep training, keep creating, keep being present in the moments you have left? Because Bruce Lee, facing exactly that choice, chose to spend his final morning doing what he loved with someone he trusted. And maybe that's not a tragedy. Maybe that's exactly how a warrior should exit. Not in a hospital bed or wrapped in fear, but in motion, engaged, alive until the very moment he wasn't.